Fifth grade lesson 2.7 is interpret the remainder. If we know what we're dividing, if we know the reason we need to do division, we should know what it is that's left over and how to adapt to that. And this lesson is going to help us with that. It is kind of a review. You did cover this last year in fourth grade, but you might need the review just to refresh your memory. Our essential question is, when solving a division problem, when do you write the remainder as a fraction? Let's unlock the problem. Scott and his family want to hike a trail that is 1,365 miles long. They will hike equal parts of the trail on 12 different hiking trips. That's good. That's a long way to hike on just one trip. How many miles will Scott's family hike on each trip? So we're going to circle the dividend that you will use to solve the division problem and underline the divisor. Okay, before we even get to that, then determining which is the dividend and which is the divisor, let me refresh your memory. The dividend is what's being split up equally, and the divisor is into how many pieces is that being split up. So think to ourselves over here, what's the amount that's the whole amount, but we're splitting it up into smaller parts? You're right, it's that whole very long mile hike. So let's go ahead and circle that. That is our dividend. And then they wanted us to underline the divisor. And the divisor is into how many pieces is that whole amount being chopped into. It is being split up into 12 different hiking trips. So since I am splitting something up equally, we know that is division. When you solve a division problem with a remainder, the way you interpret the remainder, the way you think about the remainder, depends on the situation of the question. Sometimes you need to use both the quotient and the remainder, and you can do that by writing the remainder as a fraction. Sometimes it depends on the scenario, it depends on the situation. If it's about how many buses we need to take to get all the students there, we're not going to say, oh, I'm taking 3 buses and I'm leaving these 4 kids behind because they were remainders. We're not leaving kids behind, right? So you interpret the remainder into something that adjusts for the situation. All right, now that we know that, we can write the remainder as a fraction. First, we would divide to find the quotient and the remainder, and then decide how to use the quotient and remainder to answer the question. So let's do that. First, I have 12. 12 times what number gets me to 1? Or without going over 1, nothing. 12 times nothing. So I'll put the 0 there just to be my placeholder. But of course, we know 12 times 0 would be 0, and I would still have this 1 here, bring down the 3. So what you'll start doing this year is just kind of skipping that part right here if it's a 0, and then just extending over, because I'd have 1 left over and 3, 13, right? 12 times what number gets me as close to 13 as possible without going over? 12 times 1 does that. That gives me 12. Now I'll do the subtraction. 3 minus 2 is 1. Bring down the 6. 12 times what number gets me as close as possible to 16 without going over? Only 1 does that, because 12 times 2 would be 24, and that's too high. So 12 times 1 is 12. Subtract for remainder. 6 minus 2 is 4. Bring down. And now 12 times what number gets me as close to 45 as possible without going over? 12 times 2 is 24, and then double that, that's 48. So 4 of them's too high. So it would have to be 3. 12 times 3, and I'm going to go ahead and calculate out what is 12 times 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 1 is 3. Some of you know your 12s already and did not have to calculate that off to the side. I don't have those memorized. So it's 3. And that gives me 36, but I have some miles left over. 15 minus 6 is 9. So I have a 9 out of 12 left over. Okay, so now we have this answer. We have 113 here. I can ignore that 0. 113. That's representing what? It's representing, so we had the whole amount of miles that they were going to do for this entire trail. They were going to split it, though, because it was so many, into 12 separate hikes. And if they split it equal into 12 separate hikes, that's how many miles they would have to hike each hike, which to me still seems like a lot. But okay, Scott's family, you do you. All right. Well, let's answer these questions now that we recognize what each of these numbers represent. The blank represents the number of trips Scott and his family plan to take. That's the divisor. It said they were going to take 12 different hiking trips. So the divisor, which was 12, the blank represents the whole number part of the number of miles Scott and his family will hike on each trip. The quotient does that. The answer does that. Quotient, 113 miles on each trip. The blank represents the number of miles left over. The remainder does that. The remainder represents the number of miles left over. And the remainder represents 9 miles, which can also be divided into 12 parts and written as a fraction. And we kind of did that already because we've been doing that a little bit already. 9 out of the 12 is what's left over. So there's an extra 9 miles over to be split over 12 trips. Write the quotient with the remainder written as a fraction in simplest form. So we need to simplify this fraction though. So let's simplify that fraction. 3 divides equally into both of those, both to 9 and 12. 9 is a multiple of 3 and 12 is a multiple of 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. And so my final answer would be 113 3/4 of a mile would cover them for the full 12 trips. They would be able to get all of this if they did 113 3/4 of a mile. And then if they did that for 12 trips, they'd get it. So Scott and his family will hike 113 3/4 of a mile for every trip, and that will help them complete in 12 trips the total mileage. Okay, here's another example using only the quotient. Again, it depends on the question that's being asked or the scenario that we're looking at. So let's see how this looks different if we're using only the quotient and ignoring our remainder. The segment of the Appalachian Trail that runs through Pennsylvania is 232 miles long. Scott and his family want to hike 9 miles each day on the trail. How many days will they hike exactly 9 miles? So this time they're not asking how many each day. They're asking how many will they hike exactly 9 miles only, and whatever's left over, then whatever. So let's take a look at that. The whole thing is 232 miles long. That is our dividend. That's what's being split apart. Into how many pieces are we splitting it? He wants to do 9 miles each day. So we're splitting it into 9 equal pieces. So that is our divisor. Let's go ahead and do the division and find out what we get. So 9 times what number gets me as close to 2 as possible without going over? Nothing. I can put a 0 there. 9 times 0, 0. I would just end up getting a 0 here, and 2 minus 0 is 2. Bring down a 3, and I end up again with 23. So I'll save myself the space and just move over now. 9 times what number gets me as close to 23 as possible without going over? Just 9 times 2 does that, because 9 times 2 is 18. 9 times 3 goes too high. It goes to 27. Too much. Subtract. Got to use that borrowing skills. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 5 is left over. Bring down the 2. 9 times what number gets me as close to 52 as possible without going over? 9 times 5 is 45, and 9 times 6 is 54, which is too high. So it can only be 9 times 5, 45. Subtract. 12 minus 5 is 7, and of course my double check is this smaller than that? Yes, it is. So I had 7 out of 9 left over. So there are 25 trips. Remember, this was how many miles? He wants 9 miles in each trip. How many trips will that be? He wants exactly 9 miles in each trip. How many trips would that be that have exactly 9 miles? 25 trips will have exactly 9 miles. But there's going to be some mileage left over that he'd still have to hike maybe in another trip. So find the quotient remainder. We did that. Since the remainder shows that there are not enough miles left for another 9-mile day, it's not used in the answer. He just wanted to know how many days will he hike exactly 9 miles. So it always depends on the question. It will be 25 days that he hikes exactly 9 miles. And then I guess he'll go on another trip later, one more trip that doesn't have exactly 9 miles, just has 7. Other ways We can add one to the quotient. What's the total number of days that Scott will need to hike 232 miles? Well, he's got 25 days and then he's got 7 more miles. So he can hike 26 days and then he will cover all of it. So to hike the 7 remaining miles, he will need 1 more day. So Scott will need 26 days now, 25 with the 9 miles, and then 1 more day with the 7 more miles that are left. Or you can use the remainder as the answer. If Scott hikes 9 miles each day, except the last day, how many miles will he hike on the last day? The remainder is 7, so Scott will only hike 7 miles on the last day. So the whole thing about this lesson is really, honestly, just really understanding what each of the numbers represent. And you have to read the story carefully. There's where your language arts skills come into play. Read the story carefully. Know what each number represents. Know what your quotient is representing. Know what your remainder is representing. And that takes practice, but you get pretty good at it after a while. Let's try this. A sporting goods store is going to ship 1,252 sleeping bags. Each shipping carton can hold 8 sleeping bags. How many cartons are needed to ship all of the sleeping bags? Well, what am I shipping and what's the entire amount that's being shipped? 1,252 sleeping bags. Right there. That's my dividend. And then each shipping carton can hold 8 sleeping bags. So I'm splitting all of these sleeping bags into groups of 8. So I'm splitting it equally into 8 pieces. That's my divisor. I go ahead and do my division. 8 times what number gets me as close to 12 as possible? 8 times 1 gives me 8. They did that for us. 12 minus 8 is 4. Bring down the 5. 8 times what number gets me close to 45 without going over? 8 times 5 does that because that's 40. Subtract for the remainder. I get 5. Bring down the 2. 8 times what number gets me close to 52 without going over? 8 times 6 is 48. That's going to be it. That's as close as I can get. 8 times 6 is 48. Subtract. I'm going to have to borrow on that one. And I get 4 out of 8 left over. So what this tells me, let's go back and think about what these stand for. This is all the sleeping bags. This is how many fit into each box or carton. So how many cartons am I needing? I'm going to need 156 cartons. But that's not going to fit all of these. I'm still going to have 4 left without a carton. So there are how many sleeping bags left over? 4 sleeping bags left over. Am I just going to never mind, just throw those 4 in the garbage? Or am I going to go ahead and ship them? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. And, they're probably expensive sleeping bags. So let's go ahead and ship them so we can make money off of them. So we'll ship them. So we have these 156 containers for all of most of these. Let's get 1 more container to fit the 4 in there. So we're going to do 157 containers instead. This whole thing is about understanding the question, understanding the story, and then recognizing what the remainder is and what it represents, and then what are you going to do about it? Okay, let's practice one, and then you can decide if you're ready to go on Think Central without me or not, or if you want a few more practice ones after number 1. Erica and Bradley want to hike the Big Cypress Trail. They will hike a total of 75 miles. If Erica and Bradley plan to hike for 12 days, how many miles will they hike each day? So first we'll divide to find the quotient and remainder. I need to know what I'm dividing. The whole amount that they're hiking is 75 miles, so there's my dividend. And they are doing that in over 12 days. So they're splitting that equally into 12 days. So there's my divisor. 12 times what number gets me 7 or under? Nothing, so 0 there. And then just go to the next one. 12 times what number gets me close to 75? 12 times 5, maybe. Let's do 12 times 5. I think 12 times 5 is 60. It is. So let's 12 times 6 and see if that fits. That's 12, 6, 72. That fits. But another 12 is not going to fit. So I'm going to use the 6 here. That gives me 72. And 5 minus 2 is 3. I have a remainder of 3. So let's now think about how to use the quotient and remainder to answer the question. Our question is, how many miles will they hike each day? They're going to hike 6 miles each day. And that will give them, if they do that for 12 days, that will give them 75 miles. But there's these 3 miles left that they need to take care of. And maybe they just want to split those equally also over the course of the 12 days. So I'm going to choose then to write my remainder as a fraction because that will take care of that. 3 out of the 12. So we're going to do an answer of 6 and 3 out of the 12, but that's a fraction that is reducible. So let's reduce that because 3 is a multiple of 3 and 12 is also a multiple of 3. 3 divides evenly into both of these numbers. So let's do that. Divide by 3, divide by 3. And that's going to give us 6 and 3 divided by 3 is 1. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So instead, if they do every day for the 12 days, if they hike 6 1/4 of a mile, that's going to cover the whole thing. That's going to take care of those 3 left over. So instead, let's say, hey, let's hike 6 1/4 of a mile. So in this story scenario, leaving your remainder as a fraction makes sense. So we're going to leave it as a fraction. Now they know how many to hike each day to cover those 12 days. What if Erica and Bradley want to hike 14 miles each day? How many days will they hike exactly 14 miles? Now they're asking me the question, how many are exactly 14 miles? How many days? So we're doing now 75 miles, but we're dividing by 14. 14 times what number gets me close to 7? Nothing. So move over. 14 times what number gets me close to 75? It was, this is a 12. That's not going to work. Try 14. Let's try 14 times 5 and see what we get. That's 70. That's as close as we're going to get. So let's call that 5. And we will have 5 out of 14 left over, right? But they said how many days will they hike exactly 14 miles? They will hike exactly 14 miles for 5 days. And then after that, they'll have some left over, but they're going to be doing another hike that's a few miles shorter. So it won't be as long, it'll be a short hike. So we changed that depending on the question they asked of us. Dylan's hiking club is planning to stay overnight at a camping lodge. Each large room can hold 15 hikers. There are 154 hikers. How many rooms will they need? All right, well, we have a total of 154 hikers, and we need to divide them equally. Each large room can hold 15 of them, so we're dividing them into groups of 15. Okay, 15 times what number gets me close to 1? Nothing. Move over. 15 times what number gets me close to 15? Oh, 1 does that. Exactly 15. Bring down. And 15 times what number gets me close to 4 without going over it? Nothing, nothing. I have to say nothing, though. And that gives me 0 with 4 remainder. Now think about what these are talking about. This was the total amount of hikers, or what are they? Hiking club. Yeah, these are the total amount of hikers. These were how many fit in each room. So how many rooms do we need to get? This many rooms. 10 rooms is how many we need to get. However, that means that for these guys, my remainder is 4. That's 4 people that aren't going to fit into a room. I'm not going to leave that as a fraction because I'm not chopping them into pieces. That would be messy. So that I could fit them equally into rooms, that's not going to work. So what's my solution to this then? If I have 10 rooms and only 15 people can fit, am I leaving those 4 people to sleep outside or not let them come? What am I going to do? I'll just get another room. So instead of 10 rooms, let's get 1 more room so everybody can fit, and we'll have 11 rooms. So this lesson is just about paying attention to what the remainder is, what does it represent, and then solve for what's left over. Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to do it as a fraction? Am I just going to round down and ignore it? Or am I going to round up and include the people I left out? And you have to decide based on each situation. I hope that explained it well enough and you're ready for Think Central. Good luck.